Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be taking a look at a new vice presidential preference poll conducted from June 6th to June 8th. But before we get into it, if you want to follow my Twitter handle, that is EP Official YouTube, or if you just type in Election Predictions Official, you will find it and you will be able to follow it. I'm planning on starting to tweet a lot more leading up to the election and give you guys some updates on all things around the channel. So if you have Twitter and you want to go follow me, do so. It is also linked in the description down below. But today we're looking at this poll and the results of it, followed with a lot of crosstab results, and we're just going to look at it and analyze it, look at the pros and cons hypothetically of every single realistic presidential or vice presidential candidate for Joe Biden. Now, looking at the initial results, so these are the results from June 6th to June 8th in a poll conducted by Data Progress and Civics. This is typically a left-leaning poll, but I mean that doesn't really matter all that much when it's just a poll conducting vice presidential preference for the Democrats. So as we can see here, Elizabeth Warren is at 27%, followed by Kamala Harris at 21%, Stacey Abrams at 14%, Susan Rice at 6%, Amy Klobuchar at 5%, Val Demings at 5%, Tammy Duckworth at 2%, Gretchen Whitmer at 2%, and Keisha Lance Bottoms at 2%. So what we do know at this point, though, is that Joe Biden has basically whittled his list down to 6 candidates. These are Elizabeth Warren, Kamala Harris, Susan Rice, Val Demings, Keisha Lance Bottoms, and Michelle Lujan Grisham. So these are the rumored, at least. This is not entirely confirmed. These are the rumored 6 candidates that are left for the vice presidential nomination. Now, obviously, these other candidates are not necessarily ruled out of the running, such as Stacey Abrams, Amy Klobuchar, Tammy Duckworth, or Gretchen Whitmer, but they are seen among Democratic sources as less likely to secure the nomination than the other 6. But as we can see here, Elizabeth Warren leads by about 6 points over Kamala Harris. So these are basically the 2 frontrunners. Experts and most Democratic sources around the former Vice President Joe Biden believe that Elizabeth Warren and Kamala Harris are basically the final 2 candidates, or the 2 likeliest candidates to secure the vice presidential nomination. Now, a lot of polls have Kamala Harris ahead of Elizabeth Warren, which makes this poll a little bit more interesting that Elizabeth Warren is actually polling ahead of Kamala Harris. But the other interesting thing to note is Stacey Abrams at 14%. This is higher than most polls have her, which is usually around 6-5%, maybe even lower, simply off of lower name recognition than the other 2 candidates, Elizabeth Warren and Kamala Harris. The other interesting thing is Susan Rice at 6%. For a candidate that is not necessarily usually in the national spotlight, obviously the former national security advisor and an ambassador for Barack Obama, not necessarily extremely well known, but polling at 6%, above people like Amy Klobuchar, above Gretchen Whitmer, who received a lot of national attention with her whole COVID-19 handling, and Donald Trump. So that's just an interesting thing to look at. Obviously, the margin of error is plus minus 3%. That doesn't really matter all that much, since this poll is really just the preference for vice president. So moving on to the crosstabs. Second choice word for VP, as we can see, Harris at 19%, Warren at 16%, Abrams at 15%. So these same top 3. But looking at the combined first and second choice, we have Warren at 45%, Harris at 40%, and Abrams at 29%, followed by Rice, Klobuchar, Demings, Duckworth, Whitmer, and Bottoms. So that is as the first and second choice vote. So obviously Warren and Harris are extremely close, and obviously they are the 2 front runners, followed by Stacey Abrams, who seems to be in a league of her own in that 3rd place spot, then followed by the group of candidates around 5 to 10%, such as Susan Rice, Amy Klobuchar, Val Demings, Tammy Duckworth, Gretchen Whitmer, and Keisha Lance Bottoms. So moving on to the next crosstab, which candidate would make you most excited to volunteer for the ticket? So this is where we get into the pros and cons of every candidate. Now, obviously, Elizabeth Warren, the pro of picking her as the vice presidential nominee is the excitement it adds to the ticket. Now, what it could also do is, as you see in the next crosstab here, which candidate would make you most excited to donate to the campaign? Not only would Elizabeth Warren, in all likelihood, be the best candidate to bring excitement to the ticket, but also for fundraising, for donations. There's a good chance that she will bring in the most amount of money to the Joe Biden campaign against Donald Trump, who is vastly out fundraising Joe Biden to this point. Now, that's certainly a big pro, all things considered. Obviously, with a candidate like Joe Biden, who doesn't necessarily have the same excitement a candidate like Bernie Sanders would have had, adding Elizabeth Warren to the ticket could help balance that out. Add some excitement to the ticket, add some more fundraising, grassroots fundraising, and a movement behind the ticket, whereas Kamala Harris wouldn't necessarily do that as much. Now, obviously, she is still polling in second and relatively close to Elizabeth Warren in those two polls, but I do believe that it can certainly be argued that Elizabeth Warren is far more likely to bring excitement and fundraising to the ticket than Kamala Harris. Now, the con for Elizabeth Warren is going to come right around here. Among Black and Hispanic voters, Kamala Harris and Stacey Abrams poll a lot better among Black voters, and Kamala Harris herself polls better among Hispanic voters. Now, obviously, in this Hispanic crosstab, we see Harris at 23% and Warren at 22%, well within the margin of error. However, in most polls that I've seen, or the average across all of these polls, the typical notion to take is that Kamala Harris polls better among minority voters than Elizabeth Warren does, which is certainly something to take into account, given that minority voters were the demographic that basically secured Joe Biden the nomination. Obviously, what we saw in South Carolina and across the South was crucial in him securing the nomination. Now, the question is, does he supplement that with picking a woman of color in Kamala Harris or Stacey Abrams or Susan Rice? Or does he go with the Elizabeth Warren, who represents a large part of the electorate that voted for Bernie Sanders in the Democratic primaries? That is the question that I think he is going to have to answer. Now, obviously, among women and men, there's a lot of similar stats here between Elizabeth Warren and Kamala Harris. Obviously, a lot of patterns between all of these and a lot of similar results to the overall results of this poll. But the other interesting thing I wanted to note out is the preference among just independent leaning Dems. So just independent leaning Dems vastly prefer Elizabeth Warren to Kamala Harris. That's interesting. An 11-point difference. This is one of the largest differences between the first and second candidate in any of these crosstabs. Independent leaning Dems prefer Elizabeth Warren to Kamala Harris. There's another pro for the case for Elizabeth Warren becoming the nominee over Kamala Harris. The final thing to look at is the age demographics. Now, as you can see, Elizabeth Warren pulls extremely far ahead from Kamala Harris and the second place candidate actually in that crosstab, Stacey Abrams, among voters aged 18 to 34. So this is a common trend we see. The more progressive candidates receive more support among the younger voter populations in the Democratic Party. Now, obviously, Bernie Sanders did a lot better than Joe Biden did among this demographic, and Elizabeth Warren in turn does as well. Now, as we move older and older, we see Harris start to gain more and more support up until the ages 50 to 64, where she receives 27% of the vote, preference to Warren's 21%, and among voters aged 65 plus, Harris at 24% and Warren at 19%. So if you look at just the two favorites to win this nomination, the pros and cons of the two candidates, you look at Elizabeth Warren, the pros, that is, excitement, fundraising, younger voters. Now the pro for Kamala Harris, on the other hand, minorities, older voters. And the big thing about that is the older vote is a lot more present in actual elections. Now, if younger people were to vote more often than they do, Elizabeth Warren's support among younger voters would completely outweigh anything else, but they don't, or they at least typically don't. I think we will see a huge uptick among younger voters in this particular election in 2020, but as compared to the older populations or the older demographics voting in actual presidential elections, that is a more of a plus for Kamala Harris, that she is polling better among older voters than for Elizabeth Warren to be polling better among younger voters. So that is the pros and the cons for both candidates. Now, obviously, policy differences completely aside, those are the pros and cons from a simple voter and election standpoint. So thank you all guys all so much for watching. Please make sure to like and subscribe. Let me know if you like these kinds of videos where we just discuss polls, anything, elections, whatever. Please make sure to leave a like if you do like this kind of video. Please make sure to comment if you prefer some kind of other video, even dislike if you don't like this type of video. But thank you guys all so much for watching, and tune in next time.